A police officer slams a homeless black man against the hood of a cruiser. No crime, no reason. Just rage masked as authority. Phones record, voices shout. But the officer sneers. Nobody's gonna care about you. Then the man quietly pulls out a folded photograph. And the crowd gasps. Because what's on that photo changes everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sound of tires grinding against loose gravel tore through the quiet dawn. A patrol cruiser jolted to a stop outside the shuttered front of Eddie's 24-hour diner, its neon sign flickering like it was struggling to wake up from the night. The sun hadn't yet broken through the gray horizon, but the street was stirring, the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. On the cracked sidewalk, Marcus Ellison sat cross-legged near the entrance, his back resting against the chipped brick wall. His clothes were worn but neat, the kind of neat that spoke of discipline even in hardship. A faded green duffel bag rested at his side, zipped shut, its fabric thinned by time and travel. He wasn't bothering anyone. He wasn't panhandling, shouting, or blocking traffic. He was just still, too still. That stillness is what caught Officer Patrick Hensley's attention as he flung his cruiser door open. Patrick was a tall, broad-shouldered white cop in his early 40s, with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and a demeanor that swung between arrogance and suspicion. He had a reputation in this neighborhood. Everyone knew it. For Patrick, a black man sitting quietly at dawn was never just a man. It was a problem waiting to be solved. "Hey!" Patrick's voice tore through the morning, echoing across empty storefronts. "You, stand up. Now." Marcus didn't move at first. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon, as if he were waiting for the sun to break, as though Patrick's voice was just another background noise he had long learned to ignore. Patrick's hand twitched against the holster at his hip. "I said stand up. Don't make me repeat myself." Slowly Marcus shifted, not to stand but to adjust the strap on his duffel bag. He lifted his head at last, revealing a face weathered by years far harder than the average man ever knew. His beard was close-cropped, his eyes sharp but tired in a way that came not just from lack of sleep, but from the weight of being unseen for too long. "I'm not breaking any law," Marcus said, his voice low, steady. "Just waiting for the diner to open." Patrick's lips curled into a sneer. "This ain't a waiting room, pal. You can't just loiter around here. Folks don't want people like you scaring off customers." The words hung heavy in the air. "People like you." Marcus's brow furrowed, not in anger, but in a subtle flicker of acknowledgement. He had heard those words too many times. They weren't new, but every time they struck, they carved just a little deeper. "You mean homeless people?" Marcus asked, his tone dry. Patrick stepped closer, boots crunching over scattered gravel. "Don't get smart with me. I'm asking you simple questions. Where's your ID? You carrying anything I should know about?" Marcus remained calm, his body language controlled. His silence wasn't defiance. It was measured restraint, the kind only someone trained to endure humiliation could carry. But to Patrick, silence was provocation. He shifted his weight forward, towering above Marcus. "You deaf? Answer me, or I'll take you in right now." From across the street, a delivery worker unloading crates from a truck paused, eyes drawn to the scene. A jogger slowed, pulling out an earbud. The quiet morning was no longer just between two men. It was becoming a spectacle. Marcus exhaled through his nose, finally lifting his gaze to meet Patrick's. His eyes were not angry, not pleading. They carried something deeper, a patience laced with warning, the kind of look that suggested he had weathered far worse storms than this uniformed man standing over him. "I'm not causing trouble," Marcus said evenly. "But you are." Patrick's jaw tightened. He leaned down slightly, close enough that his badge gleamed in the thin morning light. "You watch that tone. You think sitting out here makes you look harmless. To me, it makes you look like a threat waiting to happen." The delivery worker set down his crate, watching openly now. A couple of teenagers passing with skateboards pulled out their phones, subtle but deliberate, recording from a distance. Marcus knew the signs. He'd seen how quickly things could spiral. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and a situation could turn fatal. But instead of shrinking back, he kept still. His silence wasn't submission. It was something else. Patrick, however, read it differently. To him, silence was disrespect. He straightened, placing a hand on his belt, his voice rising. "Stand up now, or I'll make you stand." Marcus finally rose, slowly, deliberately. His movements were precise, each shift of his weight intentional, like a man who had been trained never to waste energy. He stood taller than Patrick expected, his presence quietly commanding even in threadbare clothes. The duffel bag remained at his feet, zipped tight. Patrick's eyes flicked to it. "What's in the bag?" Marcus's reply was steady, almost too steady. "Nothing that concerns you." Patrick smirked, stepping closer. "See, that's where you're wrong. Everything about you concerns me. I don't like mysteries on my streets. You walk around with a bag like that, wearing clothes like those, sitting outside businesses at dawn. That's suspicious. And suspicious gets searched." The jogger pulled out his phone, now too, angling it openly toward the confrontation. The tension thickened. Marcus didn't flinch. "You sure it's suspicion and not something else?" Patrick's smirk faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what it means," Marcus replied, his tone even, his eyes never leaving Patrick's. The officer bristled, his authority questioned in front of an audience he hadn't realized was growing. He took another step forward, close enough that the brim of his hat nearly brushed Marcus's forehead. "You think you're clever, huh? Think you can talk your way out of this?" Marcus said nothing. His silence was louder than words. Patrick's breath quickened, frustration bubbling into anger. He couldn't stand the calm. He couldn't stand the way this man refused to show fear, refused to shrink. "Don't test me," Patrick hissed. His hand shifted, brushing against the handle of his baton. The delivery worker muttered under his breath. "Man, this ain't right." One of the teenagers whispered, "Keep filming, dude." Marcus finally blinked, his expression unreadable. But in that blink, his eyes shifted, slowly, deliberately. It wasn't fear that filled them. It wasn't resignation either. It was something else, something sharper. His gaze cut into Patrick, quiet but piercing, like a soldier measuring distance before a decisive move. Patrick felt it, an intensity that unsettled him, though he'd never admit it aloud. And then, with the baton half drawn, Patrick froze for a fraction of a second, because Marcus wasn't looking at him like a homeless man cornered. He was looking at him like a man who had nothing left to lose. As Patrick's hand gripped the baton, Marcus's eyes shifted with a quiet intensity, not of fear, but of deadly calm, leaving the officer unsettled in a way he couldn't explain. The baton hovered in Officer Patrick Hensley's grip, the weight of it, pressing down like a threat not yet spoken. The air between him and Marcus Ellison thickened, humming with the unspoken charge of two men locked in a quiet standoff. Around them, the morning continued to wake, car doors slamming in the distance, the faint rattle of an arriving bus. But here in front of the diner, time had narrowed to just these two. Marcus did not blink. His silence was not weakness, and Patrick could sense it. The look in the man's eyes was too deliberate, too heavy, too practiced. It wasn't the wild, darting stare of someone caught in desperation. It was the steady gaze of someone who had faced worse than this, and lived to tell it.
Patrick barked again, louder this time. "ID, now, don't make me ask again."
Marcus reached slowly, deliberately, into the inside pocket of his worn jacket. The audience forming across the street tensed, unsure what he might pull out. Phones lifted higher, recording from every angle. Patrick shifted his weight, ready to justify a strike if he saw even the smallest reason. What Marcus drew out wasn't a weapon. It was a folded piece of paper, edges soft from years of being handled. The kind of thing carried more for memory than practicality. His rough fingers opened it with care, like someone unwrapping fragile glass. Patrick's eyes narrowed. "What the hell is that?" Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the photo himself first, as though steadying his own heart before showing it. The picture, weathered and sun-faded, showed a younger Marcus in crisp military dress uniform, rows of medals pinned against his chest, his posture proud but unforced. Around him were men in fatigues, smiling with arms draped around each other, brothers not by blood, but by battle. A single face in the photo was circled in pen, faint now but visible. That face was gone. Patrick scoffed. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me. You carrying around some picture you printed off the internet? You think I'm gonna believe this garbage?" The words dug deep, though Marcus didn't let them show. He traced the outline of the circled man in the photo with his thumb, remembering the dust, the heat, the ringing in his ears after the explosion. Remembering how that man, the closest thing to a brother he had, never made it home. Marcus had been home almost a decade now, but home never felt like home again. The country he had risked his life for didn't see him as a veteran, didn't see him as a man who had carried secrets and scars across continents. It saw him only as another black body on a sidewalk. "Where'd you steal it?" Patrick pressed, his voice cutting. "Pawn shop? Some charity box? Guys like you don't end up in photos like this. Nah, you don't fit the part." The jogger recording shook his head, muttering, "Unreal. Man served this country, and still gets this." Patrick shot a glare at the bystanders, barking, "Keep moving. This is police business." But they didn't move. The cameras didn't lower. They all felt the sting of what was unfolding, because it wasn't just about Marcus. It was about every silent story like his. Marcus folded the picture carefully, tucking it back into his pocket. His movements were so deliberate, so patient, that it almost mocked Patrick's aggression. Finally, his voice broke the silence again. "You don't see me," Marcus said softly, not accusing, not pleading, just stating it as fact. "Not really. You see what you've already decided I am." Patrick's jaw clenched. "And what's that supposed to mean?" "You look at me, and you see trouble. You see lazy. You see worthless. You don't see the 20 years I gave in uniform. You don't see the nights I stayed awake so others could sleep. You don't see what I've carried home." For a flicker of a second, Patrick faltered. There was a truth in Marcus's tone that made his throat tighten. Though he fought it down, he wasn't about to let this man, this stranger, flip the script on him. "Save the speeches," Patrick snapped, voice louder than before. "If you were really who you say you are, you wouldn't be out here like this. Veterans don't end up on the street." That line landed heavier than Patrick intended, because Marcus's silence afterward said everything. Veterans did end up on the street. Many did. But society preferred not to see it. It was easier to assume failure than acknowledge abandonment. Marcus's hand brushed the strap of his duffel bag. Inside was more than clothes, more than scraps of food. Hidden beneath layers of folded fabric was a dossier, maps, coded notes, the kind of intelligence not meant for public eyes. Marcus wasn't just surviving out here. He was on a mission no one knew existed, and staying invisible was part of the work. But invisibility came at a cost. It meant enduring moments like this. Moments where the world measured his worth by the dirt on his boots rather than the weight of his history. The cruel irony pressed in. A man who had once parachuted into hostile ground to secure American lives now stood here, fighting just to secure his right to sit on a sidewalk in his own city. Patrick jabbed a finger toward Marcus's chest. "I'm not asking again. ID. Where is it?" Marcus didn't move this time. His gaze remained fixed on Patrick. Steady, calm, almost unsettling. Then, with a slow breath, he reached once more into his jacket pocket. The bystanders leaned forward, phones steady, anticipation rising. The jogger whispered, "Here it comes." Patrick's hand hovered near his baton again, his nerves taut, his patience thinner than paper. Marcus's fingers emerged, clutching not a driver's license, not a veteran's card, but the same folded photo again. This time, however, as he unfolded it, something new was visible on the back. A series of faint handwritten numbers, coordinates scribbled in pen. Patrick's brows furrowed. "What the hell is that?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. His thumb rested over the numbers, his eyes distant, as if debating whether showing this piece of himself was a mistake. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before but heavy enough to draw everyone in. "It's proof," Marcus said. "Proof you'll never understand." Patrick stepped closer, suspicion brimming. "What kind of proof? What are those numbers?" The sergeant arriving in the next section would know. Patrick did not. The crowd hushed, sensing something had shifted, though none of them could name what. Marcus folded the photo again, slipping it back into his pocket with a care that felt ceremonial, final. Patrick's nostrils flared. "I asked for ID. You give me some scrap paper with scribbles? That's not proof. That's nonsense. You think you're clever, mister? Think you can play me?" Marcus didn't flinch. His silence, his steady gaze, carried the same weight it had at the start, but now there was something sharper in it. He wasn't just holding on to a memory, he was holding on to a secret. And as Patrick's demand rang again, "ID, now," Marcus slowly reached into his other pocket. His fingers closed around something worn, something folded from years of use. The crowd shifted, phones steady, hearts racing. Patrick's eyes locked onto Marcus's hand, tension ready to snap. And then in one deliberate motion, Marcus drew it out. Not an ID, not a weapon, but another worn, folded photograph. This one older, more personal, more damning. As the officer demands ID, Marcus slowly pulls out a worn, folded photograph from his pocket. But it isn't what the cop expects. Patrick's eyes narrowed as Marcus slowly unfolded the second photo, the worn creases betraying how many times it had been opened and closed over the years. The paper trembled slightly in Marcus's weathered hands, though not from fear, more from the weight of memory. When the photograph was revealed, the early morning light caught it just enough to make the colors visible, though faded with time. It was Marcus, years younger, standing tall in his full green beret uniform, his posture proud yet natural, not the stiff kind of posing for approval, but the relaxed confidence of someone who had already proven himself. He wasn't alone. Around him stood 4 men, all in fatigues, all with smiles that came not from a camera but from shared survival. Their arms were slung over one another's shoulders like brothers. But one detail cut through everything. The black ink circle, drawn carefully around one man's face, a man whose smile was easy, his eyes alive. The ink told the story without words. He was gone. The crowd stirred. The jogger whispered under his breath. Man was military. Another voice from the teenagers recording muttered, "No way. He looks legit." Patrick leaned in, squinting, his expression sour. Then, with a scoff, he stepped back and let out a mocking laugh that seemed far too loud for the quiet morning. "You've got to be kidding me," Patrick sneered. "This is what you're showing me? Some beat-up photo you probably picked up at a thrift store? Stolen valor, plain and simple." Marcus said nothing. His thumb gently traced the corner of the photograph, as if grounding himself in the faces of men who were no longer here. Patrick's voice sharpened, his tone cutting with deliberate cruelty. "What's the scam? You sit out here, make yourself look pitiful, pull out some army photo, and hope people toss you a few dollars out of pity? Let me tell you something, buddy. Real soldiers don't end up like this." The delivery worker across the street muttered, "That's a damn lie. I know vets who sleep under bridges right now." But his voice was too low for Patrick to hear. Or maybe Patrick chose not to hear. Phones rose higher, their tiny cameras blinking red dots of recording. The scene wasn't private anymore. It was being preserved, shared, judged by invisible audiences, who would soon see it through screens. Marcus finally spoke, his tone low, calm, but tinged with something heavier. "You don't know what you're talking about." Patrick tilted his head, mock surprise painted across his face. "Oh, don't I? Look at you. No house, no job, no ID you can show me. And I'm supposed to believe you were out there saving the country?" He gestured broadly, waving his hand toward the cracked sidewalks, the shuttered diner. "If you were worth anything, you wouldn't be standing here with nothing." The words landed like blows, not fists, not batons, but sharper, the kind of wounds that cut beneath skin, slicing into dignity. Patrick's voice carried the unspoken message loud enough for the whole crowd to hear. This man isn't who he says he is. He's nothing. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, inhaling deeply. He had heard worse, far worse. On foreign soil, he had been cursed, spat at, and hunted. But somehow, standing here on the street, he once called home. The insult pierced deeper, because it wasn't an enemy saying it, it was his own country. A teenager in the back of the crowd whispered, "Why he gotta talk to him like that? Even if dude's homeless, you don't disrespect a vet." Patrick whipped his head toward the whisper, his voice booming, "Mind your business. This is police work." The kid didn't flinch. "Nah, this is you trying to break a man down for no reason." Laughter rippled faintly from somewhere in the group. Patrick flushed red, his authority threatened by witnesses he couldn't silence. He turned back to Marcus, the need to reassert dominance burning hot. He jabbed a finger toward the photo. "Tell me their names. Go on. You want to pretend you served? Tell me who they are." "Bet you can't." Marcus's lips tightened. His jaw flexed as memories flooded. Faces, voices, final breaths. He could have recited their names in his sleep. He carried them like a second heartbeat, but he refused to hand them over for Patrick's mockery, refused to let his brothers in arms become props in this man's theater of humiliation. Patrick smirked at the silence. "Exactly what I thought. Fake." The crowd murmured now, less convinced by Patrick's authority. A woman's voice rang out, sharp with disgust. "You ever think maybe he just doesn't want to share that with you? That maybe it means more than your damn badge?" Patrick spun toward her. "You got something to say?" "Yeah," she fired back. "You're supposed to protect people, not tear them down." Phones angled higher, catching every word, every glare. Marcus finally lifted his gaze again. His eyes, when they met Patrick's, were calm, steady, unflinching. But beneath that calm was something far more dangerous than anger. It was certain.
His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the noise. You don't know who you're dealing with.
The crowd went still, the words hanging heavy in the air. Patrick froze for a split second, unsettled by the weight behind them, though he quickly masked it with another sneer. Yeah, then enlighten me. Who am I dealing with? Marcus didn't answer immediately. His thumb pressed against the circled face in the photograph, holding the silence long enough to build an ache in the air. His eyes didn't waver, didn't break. The jogger muttered, almost to himself, "Man's not bluffing." Patrick felt something shift in his gut, a flicker of unease he couldn't place. The intensity in Marcus's tone wasn't the bravado of a desperate man. It was the calm of someone who had seen too much to waste energy on fear. For the first time since he stepped out of the cruiser, Patrick wasn't sure if he had the upper hand. Marcus raises his head, locking eyes with Patrick, whispering a chilling warning. You don't know who you're dealing with. The silence after Marcus's words, "You don't know who you're dealing with," hung in the air like a storm cloud. It wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, but it carried a weight that no one in the crowd could ignore. Phones were angled tighter now, capturing his face, capturing Patrick's shifting expression. Patrick blinked once, his sneer faltering before he caught himself and straightened his posture. His voice cracked louder, as though volume alone could erase the unease. "You trying to threaten an officer? That what this is?" Patrick barked. "Big mistake, pal. Real big mistake." Marcus didn't respond. He stood with quiet defiance, shoulders squared, photograph folded again in his hand. The duffel bag by his feet remained untouched, but the presence of it gnawed at Patrick's suspicion. From the sidewalk, a woman in her 30s, clutching a coffee cup, shouted, "He didn't threaten you. He's just standing there." Patrick snapped his head toward her, his voice sharp. "Ma'am, you don't understand what's happening here. This man is obstructing." "Obstructing what?" She cut back. "He's literally just existing. You're the one escalating this." A few voices from the crowd joined her. "Leave him alone. He's not doing anything. This is harassment." But not everyone sided with Marcus. A man in a business suit muttered loudly enough to be heard. "Looks like a scam artist to me. Bet he's playing soldier just to get sympathy." "Yeah," another chimed in. "If he was really military, why's he out here homeless? Doesn't add up." The crowd was splitting, the lines of empathy and suspicion drawn across the cracked concrete. The tension was no longer just between Patrick and Marcus. It was mirrored among the bystanders, each one projecting their biases, their experiences, their prejudices onto the scene unfolding. Patrick latched onto the skeptical voices like fuel. He gestured toward them, raising his voice so the whole street could hear. "See? People aren't buying it. This is what these types do. Loiter around, act pitiful, try to play the victim card. Not on my watch." Marcus finally spoke, his tone quiet but deliberate, aimed more at the crowd than at Patrick. "Funny thing about freedom, some of us fought for it. Others just enjoy it." The words rippled through the gathering, causing murmurs, shifting expressions. Some lowered their eyes, shamed. Others rolled theirs, dismissive. But everyone heard the truth behind it. Patrick's jaw tightened, the calmness in Marcus's tone infuriating him more than any shout could have. He jabbed a finger toward the duffel bag. "Open it, right now. Let's see what you're hiding." Marcus didn't move. "You don't have a warrant. You don't have cause." That was enough for Patrick. He stepped forward, his hand now firmly on the baton at his hip. "You think you're clever, huh? You think you can stand there, run your mouth and tell me what I can't do? I'll tell you what I can do. I can haul you in for loitering, for obstruction, for whatever else I damn well find once I get you downtown." The crowd gasped. The jogger called out, "Loitering ain't a crime, man. You can't just make stuff up." Patrick shot him a glare. "Keep talking and I'll take you in too." Phones zoomed closer. This was no longer just a confrontation. It was documentation. Marcus's eyes drifted over the crowd, scanning the faces. Some hostile, some sympathetic, some just curious. He saw in their eyes the story already forming, the narrative being written before he even had a chance to speak his truth. Because in the digital age, perception traveled faster than truth. By tonight, snippets of this scene would be online, stripped of context, dissected by strangers who didn't know him, who never would. They'd decide if he was a hero or a fraud in a matter of seconds, their judgments harder than any gavel, and he couldn't stop it. Not here. Not now. Patrick's voice boomed again, drawing Marcus back. I'm giving you one last chance. Show me ID. Open the bag, or I'll put you in cuffs. Your choice. The crowd murmured, the division widening. Some shouted, this is racial profiling. Others called back, if he's innocent, why not just comply? Every second the divide grew deeper, louder, uglier, and Marcus stood at the center, the eye of the storm, steady, calm, but weighed down by the cruel irony of it all. Once a man who carried classified missions across foreign lands, now treated as a criminal for resting his feet on his own soil. A woman's voice rose from the back, trembling but firm. He's black. That's why. If he were white, you'd let him sit there with his bag all morning. The crowd hushed at the bluntness. Some nodded, some scoffed, but none could deny the sting of truth in her words. Patrick flushed red. That's enough, he barked, his voice cracking with both rage and insecurity. This man is under investigation, and I will not tolerate interference. He reached for his cuffs, the metallic clink loud enough for the crowd to hear. Phones inched closer, catching every sound, every glare, every word. Marcus exhaled slowly, the air leaving his lungs steady as stone. His calm unsettled Patrick more than resistance ever could. The moment stretched taut, brittle, as though one more breath might shatter it. And then the low rumble of another engine broke through the noise. Another patrol car slid to a stop at the curb, its lights flashing blue against the gray dawn. The doors didn't open right away. The crowd turned, whispering, shifting their attention. Patrick glanced back, his expression tightening, because stepping out of that car wasn't just another officer. It was his superior. Suddenly another patrol car pulls up with Patrick's superior inside. The flashing blue lights painted the diner's faded bricks in a ghostly hue. The murmurs of the crowd dimmed as the second patrol car's engine cut off. Every pair of eyes shifted from Patrick's clenched jaw to the figure stepping out of the driver's side. Sergeant Linda Carter. The slam of her door carried a finality that made even Patrick straighten instinctively. Carter was in her late 40s, her presence sharp and unyielding. She wasn't the type who needed to raise her voice to command authority. It radiated from her posture, her controlled stride, the measured way she adjusted her duty belt as she approached. Her reputation preceded her. To the public she was known as efficient, tough, and unapologetically by the book. To her subordinates, she was feared for her relentless demand for order. And to Patrick she was both mentor and judge, the one whose approval he craved, and whose criticism he dreaded. The crowd fell quieter, watching the shift in power dynamics. Some expected her to rein Patrick in, to calm the growing storm. Others suspected she might double down, feeding the fire instead of putting it out. Carter's eyes swept over the scene, Marcus standing still, his duffel bag at his feet, the crowd filming from every angle, Patrick's hand hovering near his cuffs. She read it like a chessboard, each piece positioned, each potential move clear in her mind. Her gaze landed on Patrick first. Report, she said, her tone clipped. Efficient. Patrick straightened. Homeless male, loitering outside the diner, refused to show ID. Possible stolen valor scam. Non-compliant. Crowd interference escalating. He delivered it with rehearsed precision, shaping the narrative in his favor before Marcus could speak. Carter's eyes shifted to Marcus. For a fleeting second something unreadable crossed her face. Curiosity. Maybe recognition, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Sir, she addressed Marcus, though her voice lacked softness. Do you have identification on you? Marcus didn't move. His silence wasn't stubbornness. It was the same measured restraint he had carried since the start. Patrick jumped in quickly. He's refusing, Sarge. Been playing games since I pulled up. The crowd bristled. That's not true. Someone shouted. He showed you photos. Another added. You're leaving that part out. Carter turned her head slightly toward the noise, scanning the crowd. She didn't address them, but her eyes narrowed, cataloging the cell phones raised high. The certainty that whatever happened here wouldn't stay here. She returned her gaze to Marcus. Sir, if you don't comply, we'll have to take further action. Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady but tired. I'm not breaking any law. Sitting isn't a crime. The statement was so simple, so obvious, that a ripple of agreement ran through the crowd. But Carter didn't flinch. You're obstructing an officer's investigation, she replied. Her tone was firm, rehearsed, the language of policy and justification. The words landed like a hammer. Even leadership refused to see Marcus as human. He was just another case file, Another problem to be managed, to be processed, to be removed. Patrick smirked, emboldened by her siding with him. He pulled his cuffs from his belt with a metallic click. I told you, game's over. The crowd erupted. He didn't do anything. This is wrong. You're arresting a man for sitting? Carter raised her hand toward them, a silent command for order. But the shouting didn't stop. The division was boiling, spilling into anger. Marcus lowered his eyes briefly, staring at the ground as if the cracks in the pavement might swallow him whole. The cruel irony burned through him. After all he had given, all he had carried, his worth was still reduced to this moment. A black man cornered on a sidewalk, dismissed by both the officer and the sergeant sworn to serve him. Patrick stepped forward, cuffs ready, his hand reaching for Marcus's wrist. The crowd pressed in tighter, phones held high, voices rising, and then Marcus spoke so quietly, it almost didn't register. 42. 7. 19. Delta. Carter froze mid-step. The color drained slightly from her face, though she tried to mask it. Patrick blinked, confused. What? What the hell is he mumbling? Marcus's eyes lifted, locking on Carter's. This time his calm wasn't passive. It was surgical, deliberate. 42. 7. 19. Delta, he repeated. Slower, each number and letter crisp. Carter's composure faltered. Her lips parted, a sharp inhale betraying her. She knew those numbers. She knew exactly what they meant. The crowd didn't understand, but they saw her hesitation. Murmurs rippled. What's going on? Why'd she stop? Patrick looked from Marcus to Carter, frustration rising. Sarge, you know this guy. Carter didn't answer immediately. Her eyes stayed locked on Marcus's, searching, calculating. In that brief moment, her hardened exterior cracked, just enough to reveal something beneath, recognition. She knew him. Marcus's thumb pressed against his folded photograph in his pocket, the weight of it grounding him. His voice lowered further, sharp enough only for her to hear. You remember Delta, you remember what we did. And you know I don't forget. Carter's jaw tightened, her eyes flickering with something dangerously close to fear. The crowd grew louder, restless, sensing a shift but not comprehending it. Patrick's grip on the cuffs faltered, confusion written across his face. What the hell is happening here? Carter didn't answer. Not yet. Because Marcus had just spoken words that weren't supposed to exist outside classified files. Words that tied her to a past she thought was buried, sealed away where no one could touch it. And for the first time that morning, the balance of power shifted, not because Marcus raised his voice, not because he resisted, but because he spoke a truth that froze the sergeant in place. As they prepare to handcuff him, Marcus mutters under his breath, coordinates that freeze Sergeant Carter in place. The numbers hung in the air like ghostly echoes. 42, 7, 19, Delta. Sergeant Linda Carter's face didn't move, but her body betrayed her. A fraction of hesitation in her step, the faint tightening of her jaw, the way her hand flexed near her belt, as if grounding herself. To the untrained eye, she still looked composed, but Marcus saw it. He always saw it. The crowd didn't understand. To them it was just gibberish. Strange syllables from a homeless man who refused to comply. A teenager scoffed. What's he even talking about? A woman whispered. Coordinates? What kind of coordinates? Phones caught every second, their lenses unblinking, unaware of the history bleeding into the present. But Carter knew. Those numbers were not random. They were tied to a location that wasn't on any civilian map. A site that lived in whispers among only the most elite military operatives. The kind of place where missions weren't logged, where files were sealed in vaults deeper than the public would ever know. A place Carter once swore never to speak of again. Marcus's gaze locked onto hers. Steady, deliberate. He wasn't smiling, wasn't gloating. He was reminding her. Patrick, oblivious, grew impatient. Sarge, what's going on? You gonna let me cuff him, or you want me to drag this out all morning? Carter didn't answer right away. She forced her eyes away from Marcus, schooling her expression back into the cold efficiency she was known for. But inside, her thoughts tumbled. How does he know that? Who the hell is he? She cleared her throat. Patrick. Step back for a moment. Patrick blinked, confused. Step back? Sarge, we've got a non-compliant suspect. Crowd's hostile. Best move is to end this now. Step back, she repeated, her tone sharp enough to cut. The crowd caught the shift. Murmurs rose. Why is she hesitating? She looked shook when he said that. Marcus didn't move. His stillness was louder than any protest. His silence a kind of quiet defiance. He knew Carter understood, and he knew she couldn't dismiss it, not without betraying herself. Patrick's face twisted in frustration. With all due respect, Sarge, this guy's playing us, talking in riddles, trying to distract us. I say we put him in cuffs before this circus gets worse. Carter turned her head slightly, her voice low but firm. And if you're wrong, Patrick bristled. I'm not wrong. Look at him. He stopped himself, but not fast enough. The word hung in the air anyway, unspoken but felt. Black. Carter's eyes flicked back to Marcus. His expression didn't change, but something sharp moved beneath it, like a blade twisting deeper. He had endured words like that all his life, from playgrounds to foreign streets, from strangers to the very institutions meant to protect him. And still, here he stood. Carter's tone sharpened. Keep your voice down. The crowd leaned in, phones recording every word, every glance, every hesitation. The digital world was already feeding on this moment, shaping narratives before the story was even finished. Marcus finally spoke again, his voice steady, low, but aimed directly at Carter. You can tell him I'm nothing. You can tell this crowd I'm just another problem. But you and I both know what those numbers mean. You and I both know where they lead. Patrick's brows furrowed. What the hell is he talking about? Carter didn't answer. She couldn't. Because the truth was more dangerous than silence. For a flicker of a second, Marcus's eyes softened, not with weakness but with memory. We buried good men there, he said quietly. Men who deserved more than a classified grave and a forgotten name. Carter's throat tightened. Images she thought she had buried came rushing back. Dust, gunfire, a night sky split with flares, and the silence after. The kind that only comes when too many voices go quiet at once. Patrick stepped forward again, frustrated. Enough of this. I'm not playing along with his little performance. Carter's hand shot up, stopping him mid-step. The crowd gasped at the sudden authority in her gesture. Patrick froze, caught between obedience and pride. Sarge? He demanded, his voice cracking with disbelief. Carter turned to him, lowering her voice to a whisper sharp enough to slice through his certainty. Step aside, now. Patrick's face reddened. You're letting him win. You can't seriously believe. Not another word. Carter snapped, her composure slipping just enough for Patrick to see something he had never seen before in her fear. The crowd picked up on it too. The murmurs grew louder. She knows something. Why's she scared of him? What's in those numbers? Patrick's frustration boiled. He leaned closer, whispering furiously. What the hell are you doing, Sarge? He's some homeless con man. You're making us look weak. Carter's eyes didn't leave Marcus, but her words were directed at Patrick. If you knew what those numbers meant, you'd shut your mouth before you dug yourself a grave. Patrick froze, his face drained of color. For the first time he realized this wasn't just a petty sidewalk standoff. Something far larger was at play. Something he couldn't comprehend but could feel pressing in around him. Marcus's gaze remained steady, calm but unyielding. His silence said more than words ever could. The crowd was restless now, torn between curiosity and outrage, between sympathy and suspicion. Phones captured Carter's hesitation, Patrick's confusion, Marcus's steady defiance. By tonight the clips would spread online with captions like "Cop silenced by homeless vet," or "The numbers that froze a sergeant." But here in the raw immediacy of the moment, the truth pulsed like a live wire. Marcus Ellison wasn't just another man on the street. He carried knowledge no civilian should have. Knowledge that tied him to a past Carter thought had been sealed forever. Patrick's voice wavered as he finally asked, "What do those numbers mean?" Carter didn't answer immediately. Her jaw worked, her chest rose and fell in sharp breaths. Then she leaned in close to him, her whisper urgent, laced with something Patrick had never heard from her before. Fear. If he knows them, she said, her voice barely audible, then everything we thought was buried isn't. Patrick's eyes widened, the color draining from his face. He staggered back half a step, his cuff still dangling uselessly in his hand. And in that moment, for the first time since the cruiser screeched to a halt, the balance shifted. Not because Marcus raised a hand, not because he shouted, but because of the truth he carried. A truth that terrified even those in power. Carter pulls Patrick aside, whispering something urgent, and his face goes pale. Patrick's face was pale, his cuffs hanging loosely in his hand, his authority draining with every second. Sergeant Carter's whisper had struck him like a bullet. Short, sharp, undeniable. If he knows them, then everything we thought was buried isn't. Patrick couldn't make sense of it, but he could feel the truth in Carter's tone. It wasn't just fear, it was recognition. She knew those numbers, and that terrified her. The crowd, restless and divided, pressed in closer. Some shouted at Patrick, demanding answers. Others jeered at Marcus, insisting it was all an act. But no one could ignore Carter's hesitation. No one could ignore the shift in her posture, the way her eyes refused to leave Marcus, as though he held the trigger to a weapon only she could see. Marcus, calm as ever, let the silence work for him. He had learned long ago that silence carried more weight than shouting. The louder the world grew, the quieter he became, and in that stillness, truth revealed itself. But inside, beneath the calm surface, his thoughts burned. He hadn't wanted to reveal the numbers, not yet. His mission depended on invisibility, on passing through the city as nothing more than another forgotten man. But Patrick had pushed him too far, and Carter's arrival had forced his hand. Because Marcus Ellison wasn't just a homeless veteran. He wasn't simply surviving the streets. He was working, watching, tracking, and everything depended on staying unseen. Months earlier, while sleeping beneath an overpass, Marcus overheard a conversation that set his blood cold. Two men, careless in their whispers, spoke of shipments, of dates, of targets. He knew the tone, the cadence. He had heard the same kind of talk in war zones across the world. Only this time it wasn't Kabul or Fallujah. It was home. The military had trained him to detect threats, to decode patterns where others saw noise. So he listened, and he followed. He pieced together fragments, license plates, rendezvous points, coded messages left in graffiti. It painted a picture too clear to ignore, a domestic terror cell, plotting something that could devastate thousands. He reported it once, to an old contact. But bureaucracy moved slow, too slow. Background checks, jurisdiction debates, red tape strangling urgency. And Marcus knew waiting would cost lives. So he went underground, deeper than before. The disguise of homelessness was perfect. No one looked twice. No one questioned why he lingered in alleyways, why he sat outside businesses at odd hours, why he followed men through the shadows. He became invisible by choice, because invisibility kept him close to the threat. And now that invisibility was unraveling, stripped away by a racist cop's suspicion and a sergeant's haunted memory. Patrick hissed under his breath, desperate to regain control. "What the hell is going on, Sarge? You're acting like he's dangerous. He's just some nobody with a bag and a story." Carter's eyes cut to him, sharp as glass. "Don't underestimate what you don't understand." Marcus spoke then, his voice steady, aimed at both officers but loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You think I'm standing here because I've got nowhere else to be? You think this bag is all I own? You think this is about pity?" He paused, the silence after his words forcing everyone to lean in. "I'm here because something is coming, and when it does, you'll remember that I warned you." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some scoffed, dismissing him as delusional. "He's paranoid. Sounds like a conspiracy nut." Others frowned, their doubt cracking under the weight of his tone. "What if he's serious? What does he mean?" Patrick rolled his eyes, scoffing loudly. "Oh, great. Now we've got a prophet on the sidewalk. You hear this? A threat is coming." That's what they all say before they beg for money. But his words didn't land the way they once had. The crowd had seen Carter flinch, had seen her freeze when Marcus spoke the numbers. They couldn't unsee that. Marcus's voice softened, cutting through Patrick's mockery. "You laugh because you don't know what it's like to see death before it arrives. You dismiss me because it's easier than believing the truth. But Sergeant Carter knows. She's seen what I've seen. She knows what those numbers mean." All eyes turned to Carter. For the first time in her career, she felt truly exposed, not to Marcus, but to the crowd. Their phones captured every twitch of her jaw, every flicker in her eyes. She couldn't hide from them. Patrick whispered fiercely, "Sarge, say something. Deny it. Shut him down before this gets worse." But Carter couldn't, not convincingly, because Marcus wasn't lying. The weight of the truth pressed down. He was here on purpose, moving like a shadow to track a threat no one else believed in, and she had just helped drag him into the spotlight. Marcus exhaled, his gaze scanning the crowd, then locking back on Carter. "They won't believe me. Not now, not until it's too late. But you You know I'm not making this up. And if you choose to treat me like nothing, if you choose to put me in cuffs, you'll be the reason blood spills on this city's streets." The crowd murmured louder. Some leaned into sympathy, others recoiled in doubt, but every single one of them felt the shift. This wasn't just about a sidewalk standoff anymore. Something bigger was threading its way into the morning air. Patrick shook his head, disbelief dripping from his voice. "This is insane. He's just playing you, feeding you some cryptic crap, so you hesitate. Look at him. He's a homeless black guy with a bag of junk. That's it. That's all he is." The cruelty of the words cut through like a blade. The crowd gasped, some shouting back, "That's racist. You don't talk to people like that." But Patrick didn't care. He needed control, and humiliation was his weapon of choice. Marcus's calm didn't break. He had been called worse in places far darker than this. But his eyes hardened, not with rage, but with a resolve that made even Carter shift uneasily. Because beneath the calm, he wasn't bluffing. And then, as the tension rippled outward, one of the teenagers recording in the back of the crowd jolted, phone buzzing in his hand. He frowned, glancing down at the screen. A new message. It wasn't from a contact he knew. The number was unrecognizable. The text read, "He's been compromised. Eliminate him." The boy's eyes widened, his breath catching. He looked up at Marcus, then back at his phone, panic rising. The digital age had just turned deadly. One of the bystanders recording Marcus suddenly receives a cryptic text. "He's been compromised. Eliminate him." The teenager's hand trembled as he stared at the glowing message on his phone. "He's been compromised. Eliminate him." His throat went dry. He looked up, his eyes darting between Marcus, the officers, and the sea of strangers pressed along the sidewalk. None of them knew what had just appeared on his screen. He wanted to scream, to show someone, but something in the wording made him freeze. Whoever sent it wasn't just watching Marcus. They were watching him. The crowd continued to buzz with anger and confusion, divided between sympathy and doubt. Phones were still raised, recording every second, feeding content to an invisible digital audience. Yet in the swirl of noise, a new tension slid quietly into the edges of the scene, unseen by most but felt in the way the air seemed to thicken. Marcus felt it first. His instincts honed in deserts, jungles, and war zones, picked up on shifts others would never notice. The way two men in the back stopped filming, their cameras lowering, their eyes scanning too carefully. The way a woman leaned against a lamppost, pretending to scroll her phone but never once looking at the screen. The way stillness crept into spaces where chaos should have lived. They were here, watching. Marcus knew this day would come, but he hadn't expected it to happen like this. Dragged into the spotlight by Patrick's arrogance and Carter's hesitation, his cover wasn't just cracked, it was collapsing. And once exposed, he wasn't just useless, he was expendable. Patrick, oblivious, paced in front of Marcus like a predator circling prey. "Well, you gonna comply or do I slap these cuffs on and give you a ride?" Carter's eyes lingered on Marcus, the weight of his silence pressing into her. She hadn't spoken since the coordinates. She didn't need to. Her unease said enough. The crowd shouted back at Patrick, but he hardly heard them. He was too focused on his own authority, desperate to prove he hadn't lost control. Every word out of his mouth was louder than the last, posturing for dominance, blind to the shadows moving just beyond the camera lenses. And with every second Marcus was kept pinned in place, the danger grew sharper. Because the operatives weren't waiting for a clean opportunity. They thrived in chaos, in noise, in moments when all eyes were pointed the wrong way. The teenager who received the text glanced up again. His eyes locked on a man he hadn't noticed before. Medium build, dark hoodie, cap pulled low. The man wasn't filming. He wasn't watching the cops. He was watching Marcus. His hand never left the pocket of his hoodie, his movements deliberate but restrained, as though waiting for the exact second when attention turned just enough. The boy's chest tightened. He looked back at Marcus, who was still standing with his calm, unreadable face, and then back to the hooded figure. His palms went slick with sweat. He wanted to yell out a warning, but fear pinned his tongue. Meanwhile, Patrick kept pressing. "This is the last time I ask, Ellison. Bag or cuffs, your choice. Don't waste my time." Marcus didn't answer him. Instead, his eyes swept the crowd again, careful, precise, noting every subtle movement. His instincts screamed louder now, but his body remained still. Any reaction, any slip, and the operatives would strike before he had a chance to steer the outcome. Patrick mistook the silence for weakness. He leaned in closer, sneering. Thought so. All bark, no bite. Carter's voice, low but cutting, broke the moment. Patrick. Shut up. Patrick blinked, caught off guard. Excuse me. You're making it worse, she said firmly, her tone laced with something he didn't recognize, fear, and something bordering on respect for Marcus. The crowd murmured again, their attention flicking between the officers. The divide deepened. Some were convinced Marcus was the victim of harassment. Others whispered that he was hiding something dangerous. Neither side knew how close to the truth they both were. Marcus finally spoke, his words soft but steady, cutting through the noise like a scalpel. Every second you keep me here, you're putting them in danger. The crowd shifted, confused murmurs spreading. What does he mean? Who's in danger? Patrick scoffed. Oh, don't start that again. Playing the martyr card now. Save it. But Carter's eyes narrowed. She caught the way Marcus's gaze flickered, not at her, not at Patrick, but toward the edges of the crowd. It wasn't random. He was signaling without words, warning her, and for the first time she felt it too. The subtle wrongness of the atmosphere. The watcher. The teenager finally worked up the courage to step forward, his voice cracking. Hey, I just got a text. But before he could finish, the hooded man in the back shifted, his shoulders squaring, his hand pressing deeper into his pocket. Marcus saw it. His voice sharpened, no longer calm but commanding. Don't. The crowd went still, startled by the sudden edge in his tone. Patrick rolled his eyes, annoyed. Don't what? Stop trying to act like you've got control here. But Carter's hand instinctively moved closer to her holster, her instincts screaming that something real was breaking the surface. The boy's voice rose, panicked now. He's right there. That guy, he's watching him. Every head in the crowd turned toward where the boy pointed. The hooded man didn't flinch. He stood still, unmoved by the sudden attention. But his hand stayed buried inside his jacket pocket. And that stillness, that unshakable calm, was more terrifying than if he had bolted. Phones swung toward him, cameras recording. The murmurs turned to anxious shouts. Who is he? What's he doing? Why is his hand in his pocket? Marcus's voice cut through again, low and razor sharp. He's not here to film. He's here for me. Patrick barked out a laugh. But it was brittle, forced. Oh, so now we've got assassins in the crowd? This is ridiculous. But Carter didn't laugh. Her eyes locked on the hooded man, her instincts colliding with the memory of Marcus's coordinates. She didn't know the full story, but she knew enough. Marcus wasn't bluffing. The crowd pressed back instinctively, forming a circle of uneasy space around the hooded figure. The teenager clutched his phone tighter, the text still glowing on the screen. Patrick's bravado cracked for a fraction of a second, as the weight of the stairs shifted toward him. If he dismissed this, and something happened, the blame would fall squarely on his shoulders. Carter's voice lowered, meant only for him. If you keep him here, you're handing him over. Patrick swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. Handing him over to who? Carter's gaze didn't leave the hooded man. To whoever's been waiting for this moment. And as the hooded figure finally began to move slow, deliberate steps through the circle of frightened bystanders, the crowd fell into a hush, every breath caught in their throats. His head stayed low, his face obscured, his hand still buried deep inside his jacket pocket. Marcus's eyes followed him, unblinking. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. He knew exactly what was coming. The boy whispered, his voice trembling. He's coming straight for him. And then in the silence thick enough to choke, the shadowy figure drew closer. Step by step, his hand still hidden inside his jacket. A shadowy figure in a black hoodie slowly approaches the crowd. Hand inside his jacket, the hooded figure closed the distance with slow, deliberate steps. Every eye in the crowd tracked him, the way prey watches a predator moving in plain sight. His hand remained buried deep inside his jacket pocket, his shoulders squared, his stride unflinching. The world seemed to shrink to that single movement. The honk of a distant horn, the whir of a delivery truck engine, even Patrick's sharp breaths, all of it faded under the weight of what was about to happen. Marcus's body remained still, but his mind was already calculating. Distance, timing, exit points. The faces of the crowd blurred into one indistinct mass, but the figure in the hoodie was sharp, carved into focus. Marcus recognized the cadence of his steps, the deliberate control. This wasn't panic. This was training. The teenager clutched his phone, the cryptic message still glowing on the screen. His voice cracked. He's coming. He's coming right for him. The crowd reacted in a ripple. Some stepping back in fear, others pressing forward to capture the moment on their phones. Dozens of tiny red lights blinked as cameras rolled, the digital age turning fear into content in real time. Patrick finally barked, "Hey, you! Hands where I can see them." The figure didn't respond. His steps quickened. Carter's hand hovered near her holster. Her jaw clenched tight. Something in her eyes said she knew this was no ordinary threat. But she stayed frozen, torn between instinct and fear of what acknowledging Marcus's truth might mean. Then, in a flash, the figure lunged. His arm shot forward, his body driving through the circle of bystanders. Screams erupted, the crowd scattering in panic. Phones dropped, some clattering against the concrete. Patrick stumbled back, cursing, his cuffs slipping from his grip. Carter drew her weapon halfway before hesitating, caught between rules and reality. And Marcus moved. Not with the sluggishness of a man beaten down by the streets. Not with the hesitation of someone caught off guard. He moved with precision, with speed born from years of drilled muscle memory. From nights of training that broke lesser men, his body responded before thought. A reflex carved in combat. In one motion, he sidestepped the lunge, catching the figure's wrist with a grip that spoke of strength hidden beneath worn clothes. His movements were clean, efficient, terrifying in their ease. The crowd gasped, disbelief crashing over them. The man they had seen as a helpless broken wanderer had shifted in an instant. No wasted motion, no hesitation. He was something else entirely. Patrick's eyes widened. What the? The hooded man struggled, but Marcus's hold was unyielding. He twisted, redirecting the momentum, sending the figure stumbling to the ground without striking him, without cruelty. It was subduing, not assault. Control, not chaos. The crowd's shouts shifted. "Did you see that?" He knew what to do. That wasn't luck, he's trained. Phones were raised again, capturing the transformation. The narrative rewritten in real time. The homeless man who moved like a soldier. The hooded figure scrambled, but Marcus stood over him, calm, unshaken, his eyes scanning the perimeter even as the subdued man writhed beneath him. Because Marcus knew this wasn't over. Operatives never moved alone. Patrick, scrambling to reassert authority, shouted, "You can't do that. You can't, he assaulted you and now you're—" But the words rang hollow. Even Patrick could see it. Marcus hadn't attacked. He had neutralized, controlled, protected. The jogger yelled. If he hadn't moved, that guy would have had him. You saw it. The crowd buzzed, the division shifting. Doubt crumbled. The image of Marcus as helpless was gone. In its place was something harder to dismiss. A man who carried discipline in his bones. Who had just revealed himself not as victim but as warrior. Carter's eyes stayed locked on him. Her mind racing. Every motion, every decision Marcus had made. Controlled, calculated, efficient. It was the movement of someone trained in ways most people couldn't even imagine. And she knew then, without a shadow of doubt, that he wasn't lying. Marcus's voice, low but clear, cut through the chaos. This wasn't random. He wasn't here by accident. And if you don't open your eyes, you'll see more blood than you can clean up. The crowd fell silent, his words slicing through panic like a blade. Patrick, rattled, tried again. You're making this up. You're trying to look like the hero now. But his voice was drowned out by the rising wail of sirens. More patrol cars, racing toward the scene. Marcus's eyes didn't turn toward them. They turned past the crowd, past the chaos, to the street beyond. Because he had heard it. A low rumble, steady, deliberate, not a passing truck, not random traffic. The unmistakable hum of an engine circling. His gaze locked onto it. A dark van moving slowly around the block, too slow to be casual. Its windows tinted, its movements deliberate. Marcus's jaw tightened. His instincts sharpened to a razor's edge. The man on the ground was just a distraction. The real threat was still moving, still waiting. And as the van rounded the corner, crawling closer, Marcus's heart sank. They hadn't just found him. They were here to finish it. As sirens wail louder, Marcus spots a van circling the block. The real threat. The van crawled down the block like a predator stalking prey. Its dark frame seemed to drink in the morning light, the tinted windows masking whatever sat inside. To most of the crowd, it looked like just another vehicle, slow, maybe suspicious but unremarkable. To Marcus, it was the sound, the rhythm, the way it moved. He knew it. He had tracked it for weeks. His jaw clenched, his muscles taut beneath his worn jacket. The hooded figure on the ground had been nothing more than bait, a distraction designed to flush him out, to force him into visibility. And now, with the eyes of an entire crowd on him, with patrol cars wailing louder in the distance, his cover was gone. Marcus's instinct screamed. They wouldn't send the van if they weren't ready to finish it. The sirens grew closer, bouncing off the diner's walls, mingling with the rising noise of the panicked crowd. But Marcus knew those sirens meant nothing. Local law enforcement wasn't prepared for what was coming. Patrick followed Marcus's gaze, frowning. "What? What are you looking at?" Marcus didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the van, his silence sharper than any words. Carter noticed too. Her body stiffened, her hand brushing instinctively against her holster. She whispered under her breath, more to herself than anyone else. "No, not here. Not like this." Patrick's frustration spiked. He turned toward her, demanding, "What the hell is going on, Sarge? You know something, don't you? This guy, he's not just some bum, is he?" Carter didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed glued to the van. "You don't want to know, Patrick." The crowd shifted uneasily, following their gazes. Whispers spread quickly. "Why's that van circling? That thing's been around here twice already. Something's wrong." Phones swung toward it, capturing the slow creep of its tires against the pavement. The digital narrative shifted again. First a homeless man, then a soldier, now a looming shadow in the form of a van. Patrick's voice cracked louder, trying to mask the tremor in it. "Tell me, what's happening? Who the hell is this guy?" Marcus finally turned his head, meeting Patrick's eyes. His voice was low, calm, unflinching. "Not who you think." Patrick froze at the weight behind the words. In that instant, all the mockery, all the dismissals of stolen valor, and just another black vagrant crumbled. Marcus's silence, his precision, his warning, it all made sense now. And Patrick hated it. Not just because he had been wrong, but because he had been cruel in his wrongness. The truth pressed against him like a stone on his chest. The man he had treated as worthless was in fact the only one in control. The van slowed as it reached the diner, its engine idling with predatory patience. The crowd parted instinctively, forming a wide berth around it. Fear rippled outward. Even those who still doubted Marcus could sense the danger now. Carter's voice cut through. Sharp. "Patrick, step back." Patrick's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to reclaim his authority, but his body betrayed him. His hand slipped from his cuffs, falling uselessly against his side. For the first time that morning, he felt the raw truth of it. He wasn't the one with power here. He had been nothing more than a pawn. The van's engine growled louder, like an animal about to pounce. Marcus's voice carried over the rising noise, directed not at the cops, not at the crowd, but at everyone listening, visible and invisible. "You shouldn't have come here." The words weren't bravado. They were a warning. Patrick's face twisted, torn between confusion and dawning terror. "Oh, you knew this was coming." Marcus didn't look at him. His eyes stayed locked on the van. "I've been tracking them. That bag you mocked? It's not scraps. It's intel. Proof. Everything they've planned." The crowd erupted in gasps. Phones zoomed tighter. Marcus wasn't just telling Patrick, he was telling the world. Carter's heart pounded. She knew the kind of threats that lived in shadows. The ones too messy, too politically dangerous to ever make headlines. She had glimpsed pieces of it in her own past. But Marcus was standing here with the full weight of it in his hands. And he had chosen invisibility as his shield, until Patrick had ripped it away. Patrick staggered back, his own words echoing in his ears. "If you were worth anything, you wouldn't be standing here with nothing." But now he saw it. Marcus hadn't been standing with nothing. He had been standing with everything, carrying the burden alone, because no one else would. Patrick whispered, almost to himself, "God, what did I do?" Carter's voice snapped him out of it. "You exposed him. That's what you did." The van jolted, its tires screeching slightly, as it stopped directly in front of the diner. The air thickened, the crowd holding its collective breath. Every instinct in Marcus's body screamed at him. He had lived this scene before, different countries, different enemies, but the same rhythm, the same deadly patience before an explosion of violence. He whispered under his breath, words no one but Carter caught. "Stay calm. Don't run. Running makes it worse." Patrick's hands shook. Worse? What the hell could be worse than this? Carter's eyes didn't leave the van. You'll find out. Then, with a hiss, the sliding door on the passenger side began to open. The sound was deliberate, mechanical, chilling. The crowd shrieked, stumbling back. Phones wobbled in shaky hands. Still recording. Patrick's breath caught. His bravado finally shattered. Marcus's expression didn't change. His eyes narrowed, steady, locked on the dark gap widening in the van's side. And as the door slid fully open, the shadows inside sharpened into form. Not one man, not two, but 3 armed figures, rifles raised, their barrels gleaming under the weak morning sun, pointed directly at Marcus. The van door slides open, revealing armed men pointing rifles. The rifles leveled at Marcus shimmered in the thin morning light, their barrels steady, unflinching. Time seemed to stutter, every sound on the street suddenly sharper, the quickened breaths of the crowd, the hum of the van's engine, the faint metallic click as one of the gunmen adjusted his grip. The crowd screamed. Phones jerked wildly as people scrambled for cover, ducking behind benches, mailboxes, even trash cans. The street dissolved into chaos, but the cameras kept rolling, capturing everything. Patrick stumbled back, his face drained of color, his voice cracking. Jesus Christ, they're armed. What the hell? Carter yanked him by the collar, pulling him down behind the patrol car. Shut up and get down. But Marcus didn't move. He stood tall, his body centered, his gaze locked on the men in the van. To the untrained eye it looked like madness standing exposed against rifles at close range. But to Marcus, it was calculation. Running now would trigger chaos. Hesitation would get people killed. And then the first shot cracked. The sound thundered through the street, shattering the fragile tension. Bullets sparked against the patrol car's hood, tearing through the diner's window. The crowd shrieked louder, scattering in every direction. Marcus moved, not with the clumsy panic of civilians, but with sharp, disciplined purpose. He lunged toward the nearest mailbox, sliding behind it as another burst of fire tore into the sidewalk where he had stood seconds earlier. Patrick cowered beside Carter, trembling. This can't be happening. We're in the middle of the damned city. Carter's voice was clipped, furious. Believe it. This is what happens when you treat soldiers like beggars. You miss the war when it comes to your front door. Marcus peeked from behind the mailbox, scanning the attackers' movements. 3 of them disciplined, their stances too precise for amateurs. They weren't random thugs. They were trained. His duffel bag was still by the diner steps, just a few feet away, bullets chewing the pavement around it. Inside it, evidence, maps, everything he had gathered on these men. But he couldn't reach it now. The irony clawed at him. The very street where he'd been degraded, where Patrick had called him worthless, was now the battlefield where he had to prove again that his life had meaning. Another round cracked past his ear. He ducked lower, heart pounding steady but focused. He scanned the environment, the trash bins tipped over from fleeing civilians, the lamppost casting a long shadow across the sidewalk, the shattered diner window offering cover. Each detail became a tool, a piece of the puzzle. Marcus sprinted low, weaving between obstacles with precision. Bullets trailed him, but he dove behind a metal trash bin, the impact of rounds ringing against it like a drum. The crowd gasped at the speed, the sharpness of his movement. Did you see that? A bystander hissed from cover. He's moving like a soldier. Another voice whispered. He is one. He told us. Patrick's hands shook violently as he peeked from behind the patrol car. He had mocked Marcus just minutes ago, dismissed him as trash, but now watching him glide across the street under fire, his gut twisted with guilt. Every cruel word he had spat back at the man seemed to echo louder in his ears, like accusations. Carter, crouched beside him, whispered fiercely. Now do you understand? He wasn't bluffing. He's the only reason we're not all dead already. Marcus grabbed a broken signpost from the ground, angling it like a mirror to catch the attacker's reflection. He spotted their rhythm, their firing pattern, the seconds they hesitated to reload. Knowledge was his weapon now. The attackers advanced from the van, spreading out, their boots pounded against the pavement, their rifles cutting through the air with deadly precision. Marcus broke cover again, diving through the shattered diner window, glass crunching under his boots. Bullets chased him, shattering what glass remained, but he vanished inside before they could pin him down. Inside, the diner was empty. Chairs overturned in the scramble. Coffee cups shattered across the floor. He crouched low, peeking through the jagged edges of the window. The attackers scanned the street, trying to locate him. The crowd filmed from their hiding spots, whispering fiercely. Where'd he go? He's inside the diner. God, he's outnumbered. Patrick shook his head, muttering, This is insane. He's one man against. Carter cut him off sharply. One man who knows what he's doing. More than you ever will. Patrick flinched at her tone, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. Marcus moved through the diner's kitchen, grabbing a metal tray. He propped it at an angle, catching sight of the gunman's reflections, without exposing himself. He counted their steps, their spacing. Years of training flooded back, instinct guiding him. And then he made his move. He burst from the side door of the diner, ducking low behind a row of trash bins. The attackers turned, unleashing another barrage, but he was already rolling between cover, forcing them to split their focus. The crowd watched in awe, their fear mingling with disbelief. The man they had dismissed minutes ago had become the shield between them and death. Patrick's voice cracked as he whispered to Carter, I treated him like he was nothing. Carter's eyes stayed locked on Marcus, her jaw tight. And now he's saving your life. Marcus darted again, moving from mailbox to lamppost, forcing the gunman to waste ammunition. He didn't fire back. He had no weapon, but he used the city itself as his arsenal, turning every piece of cover into a tool of survival. The crowd whispered prayers, their phones trembling as they captured his movements. Then it happened. A sharp crack, louder than the others, ripped through the air. Marcus jerked mid-stride, a spray of red blooming against his shoulder. The crowd screamed. Carter flinched. Patrick's eyes went wide with horror. Marcus stumbled, his hand flying to his shoulder. The pain seared through him, hot and relentless. But he forced himself to stay upright, to keep moving. His legs wavered. His breath hitched, but he refused to fall. Not yet. He staggered behind another mailbox, his blood painting streaks across the metal. The crowd gasped, their voices rising in panic. He's hit. He's down. Oh my God, he's bleeding. Patrick's stomach twisted violently. Every fiber of his being screamed at him. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had mocked Marcus, degraded him, stripped him of dignity. And now, as Marcus bled for people who didn't even see him as human, Patrick felt the crushing weight of his failure. Carter's voice was low, furious, almost breaking. If he dies here, Patrick, it's on you. The attackers closed in, rifles raised, their boots striking the pavement like war drums. Marcus pressed harder against his wound, his vision blurring. The world tilted, every sound muffled under the weight of his own pulse pounding in his ears. His body begged him to fall. But even as his knees buckled, his eyes stayed sharp, locked on the threat. And then, with one last staggered step, Marcus collapsed onto the pavement, blood spreading beneath him. Amid the chaos, Marcus is shot in the shoulder, collapsing to the pavement. The sound of gunfire still echoed off the diner's shattered windows. But for Patrick Hensley, the world had gone quiet. He stood frozen behind the patrol car, his hands trembling, his breath shallow, his eyes locked on the sight of Marcus Ellison sprawled on the pavement, blood seeping through his jacket, pooling beneath him. The man he had mocked, degraded, dismissed as worthless, now lay bleeding because he had chosen to protect strangers who never saw him as anything more than a problem. Patrick's chest tightened. His world, so carefully built on rules, authority and unchallenged power, cracked apart in an instant. He had spent years reducing men like Marcus to stereotypes, believing the uniform on his own back made him untouchable, righteous. But now, with Marcus lying in the street, it was impossible to ignore the truth. The man he had treated as trash was the only reason anyone here was still alive. The crowd's voices pierced through, frantic and overlapping. Somebody help him. He's bleeding out. Why aren't the cops doing anything? Patrick's ears rang, his face burning with shame. The wordless accusation of every bystander seared into him. For the first time, he wasn't the authority, he was the coward. Carter crouched low beside the patrol car, eyes sharp, her gun still drawn as she tracked the attackers advancing cautiously from the van. She shouted over the chaos, "Patrick, move! Get to him!" But Patrick's legs wouldn't obey. He stammered, I can't." "Yes, you can," Carter snapped. "You think you've been tested before? This is it. Either you step up or you live with knowing you let him die." Patrick's throat constricted, His mind replayed every word he had spat at Marcus earlier that morning. People like you. Stolen valor. Worthless. Now those words felt heavier than the rifles aimed down the street. He whispered to himself almost like a prayer. He's supposed to be nothing. He's supposed to be nothing. But nothing didn't move like Marcus had. Nothing didn't anticipate bullets before they landed. Nothing didn't throw themselves into danger for people who spat at them. Marcus had been everything Patrick wasn't. The crowd's anger shifted toward him now. Their voices sharp, accusatory. Officer, do something. He's one of yours. He served.
What are you waiting for?
Patrick's body shook under the weight of it. He had lived his whole career feeding off obedience, feeding off fear. But this was different. They weren't afraid of him. They despised him. Carter's voice tore through the noise, raw and commanding. Patrick, if you don't move now, you're not just failing him. You're failing everyone. Patrick's breath caught. He stared at Marcus again. Blood spread slowly across the pavement, but his eyes, Marcus's eyes weren't shut. They were open, locked on him. Even through the haze of pain, they carried that same steady calm that had unsettled Patrick from the start. And in them, Patrick didn't see accusation. He didn't see rage. He saw something worse. Expectation. As though Marcus had always known this moment would come. Patrick stumbled forward, his legs unsteady, his heart hammering. Each step felt like wading through mud, like dragging the weight of his entire prejudice with him. He dropped to one knee beside Marcus, his breath ragged. Marcus's lips parted, a whisper breaking through the din of chaos. Took you long enough. The words cut deeper than any bullet could. Patrick fumbled, unsure of what to do. His hands hovered above Marcus's wound, shaking violently. Training he had ignored in years past came rushing back, but his body refused to act. Carter shouted again, her voice sharp. Apply pressure. Keep him alive. Patrick pressed his hands against the wound, flinching at the heat of blood against his palms. Marcus groaned softly, his body tensing. Patrick's eyes burned. He muttered under his breath more to himself than anyone else. I was wrong. God, I was so wrong. The crowd was filming every second. Phones captured Patrick's trembling hands, stained red, his face pale with guilt. The man who had been so loud in his mockery was silent now, broken. One of the teenagers whispered from behind a mailbox. He's finally seeing it. Finally seeing who that man is. Patrick's vision blurred with tears. He refused to let fall. He looked at Marcus, desperate, panicked. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix this. Marcus's eyes fluttered, his voice weak but cutting. Too late to fix, but not too late to Patrick's heart clenched. Choose. The word dug into him. All his life, he had chosen the easy path. Power over empathy, suspicion over trust, control over compassion. Now, for the first time, he was being told to choose something else. Gunfire cracked again in the distance, closer this time. The attackers were advancing. Carter fired back, her shots controlled, calculated, buying them seconds at most. Patrick's panic rose. He pressed harder against Marcus's wound, his voice breaking. I don't know what to do. His eyes darted around, searching for guidance, for a sign. And then he saw it just inches from Marcus's outstretched hand. The photograph. It had slipped from Marcus's pocket in the chaos. The edges smeared with blood. The same photo Patrick had mocked, dismissed, ridiculed as fake. Now it lay on the pavement, undeniable in its truth, soaked with the price Marcus was paying for everyone here. Patrick reached for it, his hands trembling as he lifted it. His eyes scanned the faces in the photo. Marcus in uniform, medals gleaming, brothers in arms with smiles that reached their eyes. And for the first time, Patrick believed it. His throat closed, as he whispered, broken, "What do I do?" The question wasn't just about saving Marcus. It was about saving himself from the rot of his own prejudice, from the years he had wasted clinging to hate. And in the deafening chaos of Main Street, with gunfire drawing closer and the crowd holding its breath, Patrick clutched the bloodied photograph like a confession, his words trembling against the air. What do I do? Patrick picks up Marcus's bloodied photograph and whispers, "What do I do?" Patrick knelt in the blood-soaked street, the photograph shaking in his hand, his voice trembling as the words left him. What do I do? The question wasn't rhetorical. It wasn't prideful. It was raw, desperate. A man stripped of the armor of his badge, standing bare in front of the truth. Marcus's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. His eyes fluttered open, glazed with pain. but still sharp enough to cut through Patrick's panic. He coughed, blood flecking his lips, before forcing words out, each one steady despite the tremor in his body. You, listen. You do exactly what I say. Patrick nodded quickly, his pride crumbling beneath urgency. Yes. Just tell me. Another round of gunfire cracked, closer, ripping through a shop sign. The crowd shrieked, ducking lower behind their makeshift cover. Carter fired back from behind the patrol car, buying precious seconds, but not enough. Marcus's voice sharpened. 2 flanking left, 1 circling the van. They'll push forward in 30 seconds. Patrick's breath hitched. How do you? Marcus snapped, his tone like a blade. Stop questioning. Start moving. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. Patrick stumbled to his feet, adrenaline coursing. For years he had given orders. Now he was receiving them from the man he had once degraded. And the strangest thing wasn't the humiliation. It was the clarity. Marcus was in charge. And Patrick wanted him to be. Grab the radio, Marcus rasped. Call for backup, but don't give location specifics. They'll be listening. Patrick fumbled for his shoulder mic, his voice stammering as he relayed coded distress. His words shook, but Marcus's calm anchored him. The crowd huddled close, their faith shifting before their eyes. They had watched Patrick mock Marcus, tear him down. Now they watched him obey, his posture bent, not in defeat, but in desperate willingness to be led. Marcus pointed weakly toward the diner. Inside, fire escape leads to the roof. Take position. Use the height. Make them look up. Patrick froze. You want me to? Marcus's eyes narrowed. Even in his weakened state, his authority was absolute. You want to save lives? Or you want to keep proving your pride? Move. Patrick didn't argue again. He sprinted into the diner, glass crunching beneath his boots. The climb up the narrow staircase felt endless, his breath ragged, his body shaking. When he burst onto the roof, the city sprawled before him, wide streets huddled civilians, the dark van like a spider at the center of its web. Below, Marcus had shifted onto his elbow, blood soaking his sleeve. Carter knelt beside him, furious and terrified, but Marcus waved her back. His voice was raw, but firm. Cover the civilians. Keep them low. Patrick, crouched on the roof, raised his service weapon. He had never felt smaller than he did now, just a man with a gun, waiting for the call of a soldier bleeding in the street. Marcus's hand lifted weakly, signaling, now, fire 2 rounds, left side. Patrick obeyed, squeezing the trigger twice. The shots cracked through the air, not striking bodies, but striking pavement near the advancing gunmen. The tactic worked. They scattered, heads snapping upward, their attention dragged toward the roofline. The crowd gasped. The attackers cursed, shouting to each other. Marcus's lips curled faintly. Good. Keep them guessing. Don't hit them. Heard them. Patrick fired again, each round directed by Marcus's subtle signals. He realized quickly, Marcus wasn't just fighting, he was orchestrating, turning the chaos into a battlefield he controlled with nothing more than broken breaths and a bleeding arm. The crowd watched in awe, their phones capturing the impossible image. The homeless black veteran directing the white officer who once mocked him. The balance of power reversed in the most cinematic of ways. Patrick's body shook, but his mind sharpened under Marcus's voice. For the first time in his career, he wasn't acting out of ego, or fear, or prejudice. He was acting out of trust. One of the attackers broke from cover, rushing forward. Marcus's voice boomed, stronger than expected. Roof. 3 o'clock. Now. Patrick pivoted, firing a warning shot inches from the man's path. The attacker stumbled, diving back behind the van. The crowd erupted in cheers, a strange, desperate joy breaking through their fear. Marcus's voice wavered, weaker now, but still commanding. Hold position. Don't give them control. You take control. Patrick clenched his jaw, nodding even though Marcus couldn't see him. His heart pounded, but his hands steadied. He wasn't just a cop anymore. In this moment, under Marcus's orders, he was something he had never been before. Useful. Carter's eyes burned as she watched the exchange. Every part of her training screamed at her to take command, but she couldn't. She wasn't the leader here. She had never seen authority carried the way Marcus carried it. Not in his badge, not in his weapon, but in his very presence. Gunfire rattled again, closer this time. The attackers were desperate, their movements less precise. Marcus had rattled them, forced them into mistakes. Patrick whispered into his mic, his voice steady for the first time. They're breaking. They're not coordinated anymore. Marcus nodded faintly. That's because fear works both ways. Remember that. Patrick's chest tightened. He had spent his career wielding fear against men like Marcus. And now Marcus was teaching him what it really meant. The firefight stretched on, seconds feeling like hours. Marcus's commands grew weaker, his voice thinning, but Patrick clung to every word like scripture. He shifted positions, fired when told, withheld when told. He became Marcus's instrument, nothing more, nothing less. And slowly, the tide shifted. The attackers retreated closer to their van, their discipline broken, their confidence cracked. The crowd began to believe. Maybe they would survive this. Maybe the man they had once dismissed would deliver them. Carter fired again, her aim steady. They're pulling back, she shouted. Marcus coughed, blood streaking his chin. His voice rasped, but the command cut clear. Now, pin them. Don't let them regroup. Patrick fired 3 quick shots, forcing the last 2 gunmen to drop their rifles, hands lifting in surrender. The third lay sprawled near the van, groaning, disarmed. The crowd erupted in relief, cheers rising over the lingering smoke. Phones shook as they captured the moment, the impossible image of victory carved into the street where humiliation had begun. Patrick lowered his weapon, his chest heaving. He looked down at Marcus, awe etched into every line of his face. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the hero in his own story. Marcus exhaled slowly, the last of his strength draining. His head tilted back against the pavement, his body slackening. Patrick's eyes widened. No, stay with me. You can't. Marcus's eyes fluttered shut. His chest rose once, shuddered, then stilled. The crowd fell into silence, the weight of it crushing. And Patrick, trembling, clutched the bloodied photograph against his chest, his voice breaking in the ruins of his own prejudice. Stay with me, soldier. Please. As the last terrorist is subdued, Marcus collapses unconscious. The smoke lingered in the air, curling upward like ghosts refusing to leave. The rifles lay abandoned on the pavement, their barrels cooling under the morning sun. The attackers had been subdued, their plan dismantled not by police procedure, not by tactical units, but by the man bleeding out on the street, the same man who just hours ago had been treated as if his life carried no weight. Marcus lay motionless, his chest rising shallowly, blood seeping through his tattered jacket. His face was pale, his lips parted, his breaths weak. The crowd that had once divided into mockery and sympathy, now gathered in stunned silence. Phones lowered, hands pressed against trembling mouths. For the first time since the confrontation began, no one had words. Patrick knelt beside Marcus, his uniform soaked with another man's blood. The badge on his chest gleamed faintly, but for the first time in his career, it felt heavy, like an object that accused him rather than honored him. He pressed his hands harder against Marcus's wound, whispering frantically, "Stay with me. You can't leave like this, not after everything." But Marcus didn't respond. Carter stood near the patrol car, her weapon lowered but still trembling in her hand. She had seen war zones before, moments when silence carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid words. But this silence was different. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a collective recognition, the kind of silence that replaced doubt with respect. One by one, the bystanders who had once doubted, mocked, or dismissed Marcus began to step forward. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They simply stood close, forming a ring around him, their bodies bowed by the gravity of what they had witnessed. The jogger who had filmed from the beginning removed his cap. Lowering his head, a woman whispered softly, "He saved us." Another man, once skeptical, bent down, his voice trembling, "I called him a fraud. God forgive me." Phones still recorded, but the tone had shifted. It wasn't content anymore. It was testimony. Patrick's face burned with guilt, his tears mixing with sweat. He replayed every insult, every word of disdain he had thrown at Marcus that morning. Each one now felt like a stone tied around his chest, dragging him deeper into regret. Carter crouched low beside Patrick, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "We need to get him out of here, now." Patrick nodded quickly, his hands trembling. "He needs an ambulance. He needs..." As if on cue, sirens wailed again. Different this time. Emergency responders arrived, medics rushing with stretchers and equipment. They moved with precision, kneeling beside Marcus, their hands steady as they cut through his jacket, working quickly to stabilize him. Patrick scrambled back, his breath unsteady, his hands stained red. He felt useless now, reduced to a bystander in the very moment he wanted to control. He muttered, almost to himself, "I should have seen him. I should have seen who he was." Carter didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on Marcus. Her jaw clenched. She whispered low, almost as if confessing to herself, "We all should have." The medics lifted Marcus onto a stretcher, strapping him down as oxygen hissed from a mask, pressed against his face. His fingers twitched faintly, a reflex that the crowd latched onto with hope. A murmur spread. "He moved. He's still with us." The ring of bystanders parted slowly, making way for the stretcher. But instead of jeers or whispers of suspicion, they bowed their heads. Not a word was spoken, as he was carried through. Just silence. Respect in silence. Phones lowered completely now. The crowd wasn't recording anymore. They were bearing witness. As Marcus was loaded into the ambulance, Patrick stumbled forward, clutching the bloodied photograph he had taken from the pavement. He pressed it into the medic's hand. "Don't let it leave him. It mattered." The medic nodded firmly, tucking it beside Marcus on the stretcher. Patrick stood frozen as the ambulance doors closed. For a brief moment his reflection appeared in the tinted glass. A cop who had built his career on control, staring back at a man who had lost all control but gained something heavier: truth. The ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing into the distance. The crowd remained in place, their silence stretching long after the sound faded. Carter finally spoke, her voice low, rough. "This city will know his name." Patrick turned to her, his face pale, his voice breaking. "And they'll know mine too. For what I did to him before all this." Carter's eyes hardened. "Then you better make damn sure the story doesn't end there." Within hours, the footage spread across the internet. Clips of Marcus, moving with precision, under fire. Clips of Patrick kneeling beside him, broken. Clips of the crowd forming a silent circle. Hashtags, swarmed timelines. And respect. Marcus Ellison. Homeless hero. We didn't see him. News anchors debated. Analysts dissected. But the public saw only one truth. A man society had shunned, had risked everything to save them. And the police who had dismissed him had nearly cost him his life. Patrick watched it unfold on a television in the precinct hours later, his hands shaking as he saw himself on screen, mocking Marcus, sneering, then crumbling in his blood. The backlash was immediate. Commentators called him out by name. Social media flooded with condemnation. That cop should never wear a badge again. Imagine humiliating a man who saved your life. The weight of shame crushed him. But beneath it something else stirred. A clarity he had never felt before. For the first time, he wanted to be better, not to preserve his image, but because Marcus had shown him what true honor looked like. Carter entered the room, her eyes tired, her voice sharp. "He's still alive. Critical condition, but alive." Patrick exhaled a shaky breath, relief colliding with dread. "Can I see him?" Carter hesitated. "You'll get your chance, but you need to think about what you're going to say when you do. Words won't be enough anymore." Patrick nodded, his throat tight. He looked down at his hands, still faintly stained with Marcus's blood, and whispered, "I'll follow his lead. Wherever it takes me." Later in the sterile halls of the hospital, Patrick stood outside a dimly lit room. Through the window he saw Marcus hooked to machines, his chest rising and falling shallowly, tubes snaking across his body. Nurses moved quietly around him, their faces focused, urgent. Patrick's eyes stung. He pressed his forehead against the glass, whispering to the man inside, "You're the soldier, I'm nothing. But if you give me a chance, I'll carry the orders you leave behind." Inside, Marcus lay still, his face pale, his body unmoving. But then, his hand twitched. Not a spasm, not a reflex, a deliberate twitch of his fingers, faint but undeniable. Patrick gasped, his palm pressing harder against the glass. Marcus wasn't gone. Not yet. In the hospital, Marcus's fingers twitch. He's alive. The hospital walls hummed with quiet. Machines beeped steadily. The faint shuffle of nurses' shoes echoed down the corridor, and sunlight streamed through tall windows, laying strips of gold across the sterile floors. Weeks had passed since that morning on Main Street. The chaos, the fear, the blood, it had all been replayed on television screens and social media feeds across the country. But here in the hospital's stillness, Marcus Ellison lay in a cocoon of silence. a soldier resting after yet another battlefield. His recovery had been slow but steady. The bullet had torn through his shoulder, narrowly missing an artery. Surgeons had worked for hours. For days, no one knew if he would wake. But Marcus fought as he always had. Quietly, relentlessly. Now he sat propped against a pillow, his frame thinner, his movements slower, but his eyes, those sharp, steady eyes, remained unchanged. The door creaked open. Patrick Hensley stepped inside, his uniform gone. He wore plain clothes now, a simple shirt and slacks, his badge tucked away in a drawer at home. The man who had once walked with swagger, now carried himself differently. His shoulders lower, his gaze humbled, his steps hesitant. In his hands he held something carefully wrapped in brown paper. Marcus turned his head, his voice rough but steady. "Didn't think I'd see you here." Patrick swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I wasn't sure I had the right. But I had to." Marcus studied him, the silence stretching. Then he gestured faintly with his good hand. "Well, you're here, say what you came to say." Patrick moved closer, setting the wrapped package on the small table beside the hospital bed. His hands lingered on it for a moment before pulling the paper away, revealing a wooden frame. Inside it, the photograph. Cleaned, pressed, restored. The creases were smoothed, the bloodstains erased, the glass polished. Marcus's younger self stood tall in uniform, flanked by his brothers in arms, medals gleaming, eyes alive with purpose. Patrick's voice cracked as he spoke. "I ruined it, mocked it, called it fake. But it was the truth all along. I can't undo what I said, but I can try to honor it now." Marcus's gaze fell on the photograph. For a long moment, he didn't speak. His chest rose and fell slowly, his jaw tight. Then, with a trembling hand, he reached out and touched the frame. His fingers traced over the faces of the men beside him, lingering on the ones no longer alive. His eyes glistened, his lips parting just slightly. "You have no idea what this picture cost." Patrick's eyes stung. He lowered his head. "I know I'll never deserve forgiveness. But you gave me something I didn't know I needed. A chance to change. You commanded me when I was too blind to lead myself, and I followed you, because for the first time in my life, I trusted someone more than I trusted my own hate." The room fell quiet. Marcus's eyes shifted back to Patrick, measuring him carefully. "Words are easy. Change isn't." Patrick nodded quickly, his voice breaking. "I know. That's why I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to watch me. Hold me accountable. Let me prove I'm not the same man who mocked you on that sidewalk." Marcus studied him. The silence heavy, then slowly, he nodded. "We'll see." The photograph gleamed in the sunlight, now restored not just in paper and ink but in meaning. What had once been dismissed as worthless was now undeniable proof of sacrifice, of service, of dignity that could never again be erased. Outside the room, people still debated, still posted, still shared. The world had turned Marcus into a symbol. Homeless hero trended for weeks, his name etched into headlines. But here in this quiet hospital room, it wasn't about trending topics. It was about two men, one who had carried honor all his life, and one just beginning to learn what honor meant. Marcus leaned back against the pillow, his voice quieter now. "Funny, isn't it? A man fights for a country, comes home and has to fight just to sit on a sidewalk without being treated like trash." Patrick's chest tightened. He whispered, "I wish I'd seen you before the world had to." Marcus turned his head, his gaze piercing. "You could have. Anyone could have. That's the problem." The words sank deep, heavier than any reprimand. For a while, neither man spoke. The framed photograph sat between them, gleaming like a bridge, fragile, but real. Finally, Marcus broke the silence, his voice low but firm. "We never know the battles a man has fought just to sit quietly on a sidewalk. You remember that, and maybe the next Marcus Ellison won't have to bleed for you to see him." Patrick's eyes welled again. He nodded slowly, clutching the truth as though it were a lifeline. The moment stretched, fragile, profound, and though Marcus's body still ached, though his recovery was far from complete, something in the room had shifted. Respect once withheld, now given. Not in words, not in speeches, but in silence. As Patrick rose to leave, Marcus's gaze lingered on the framed photograph, the faces of the fallen watching him still. For the first time since that morning on the sidewalk, he felt seen. And for Patrick, walking out of that hospital room, the question burned inside him, echoing with the weight of the world. If I had been in the crowd that morning, before the chaos, before the truth, would I have judged him too? We never know the battles a man has fought just to sit quietly on a sidewalk. Would you have judged Marcus too if you saw him that morning? We walk past people every day, never knowing the battles they've already fought, just to survive. How many more Marcus Ellisons will we ignore before we finally open our eyes? If this story shook you, type yes if you believe in justice, and subscribe if this broke your heart.